kind of magnetism kept me in this place? Was it out of my control? What was the ship from outer space? What was this creature that appeared before my eyes? Was it good? Was it evil? On the ship from other skies, I was frightened, I was scared, I was thrown into confusion as they stood right there in front of me. It wasn't an illusion, no doubt about it.
I'll just get how I look, because last time I did a video last week and I was too close to the camera. Let me see. Yeah, I think that's okay. So I have my tea. That's an extraterrestrial, isn't it?
It's an extraterrestrial ginger ninja cat.
Okay.
Because she always comes on to here as soon as I start talking. She'll settle down in a few minutes. She's only,
That's a good start.
Here she is. Look, I'll just show you. Here's the alien. There we go.
Okay, good. Okay. All right. So, hello everyone. In today's video, I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Johnson. Andrew is a researcher and lecturer on all sorts of topics in the conspiratorial world, that's to say, from 9/11 to the climate change scam and all the rest. And this evening I'll be racking his brain about a subject that has always interested me and many others, I'm sure, UFOs and extraterrestrials. So Andrew has written numerous books. His most recent book, in fact, was called Acknowledge, a perspective on the matters of UFOs, aliens and crop circles. I think it came out in March. Other books that Andrew wrote is Secrets in the Solar System, Gatekeepers on Earth, Climate Change and Global Warming Exposed, 9/11, Finding the Truth, and also a good few books on computer programming, which is ideal as Andrew has a degree in computer science and physics and has worked in software development and engineering for over 20 years, also lecturing and tutoring on these subjects. But perhaps, I don't know if this is true or not, Andrew, your real passion these days is your work in the alternative sphere, perhaps the truth movement or whatever one likes to call it. Giving talks and presentations, writing your books, as I mentioned, and writing and collating evidence for your website, which I recommend people check out. It's www.checktheevidence.com. And you also are a main contributor to the UFO Truth magazine. So I'm really happy to have a chance to interview a real expert today, Andrew Johnson. So thanks for joining me today, Andrew. It's a real pleasure for me.
Oh, thank you. That's a very nice introduction and very accurate. And I'm pleased that you've sort of looked at the outline of what I've done and and reported that accurately, because quite a few of hosts, they just kind of say they've seen my name or something and then they'll just ask me to come on to a program, but they don't go through what you've just gone through. So it's nice that you've taken that time, so thank you.
Okay.
And I'm very pleased to be here.
That's great. Well, I mean, I think that your experience in education is useful, because I mean, the first question I'd like to ask you is about this, because someone who studies computer science and physics, you obviously have a very mathematical and analytical mind. I mean, and I was reading today online that studying physics, exactly physics, it tends to expand the brain. That scientists have found, and it's perfect for problem solving and making one see the world in a different light to the rest, because it's physics is based on laws and there's absolutes. The way they govern the way the body, the mind, and the world works. Now, someone like me who unfortunately or fortunately got a degree in the arts, I might see things differently, maybe perhaps more emotional, perhaps. And I guess I'm wired a bit different to you. So just the first question, Andrew, I wonder, does your academic background, does it help you when you study topics like UFOs, ETs, the mad and the bad world of the conspiratorial world? I mean, do you analyze it differently because you have a science background?
I think the answer has got to be yes, and I think that's for a number of reasons. And I think, you know, we could talk about this sort of left brain, right brain, you know, scenario, and I'm more sort of right brain, I think. Although when I did one of these tests a good few years ago now, and I came about in the middle, so that, you know, I do have an interest in music and things like that. And I don't do much drawing these days. I don't do any drawing really these days, but I remember doing a bit of drawing in the past in my teens, you know, and that was, so I'm not totally without artistic ability. And I think having that analytical side, but also having the intuitive and the imaginative side, I think allows you to access some of the information in different ways. And, you know, my main bag really in all of the things that you read out is the avoidance of deception and detecting deception in its many and various forms. And so I think having an analytical mind and a problem-solving mind, you know, Dr. Judy Wood, who we will probably mention at some point in our conversation, she is from an engineering background. She's a professor of mechanical engineering and materials engineering science, and she has this saying where she says, well, if you know you're dealing with a bridge that's fallen down, you can't argue the bridge back up. You know, the only way is to find out why the bridge failed, and then develop an understanding of that so that it can be avoided when the next bridge is built that might be in a similar place or built using similar materials or similar methods. So it's that, you know, again, my main approach is the problem-solving approach, where you gather the information, you try and understand the problem, and then you work out what's going on, you know, both kind of on the surface and behind the scenes, and then you develop a solution, and then you test that solution, and then you work out whether the problem is solved or not. So that is generally my approach to a lot of the research, but also, you know, you've got to sometimes make a leap of imagination, and for example, it's important to try and digest the information and then let it settle, and then come back to it the next day or the next week or something, and the subconscious mind will then work on it, and things will then pop out at you. And I think everyone's experienced that. You don't need a degree in computer science or physics to experience that side of things. Everyone has a subconscious mind that works on things, and solutions can then come to you, you know, as you go into sleep or as you're waking up or in a dream or whatever. And so that I value and appreciate that process too. And also having a sense of humor. I think that's something which is important in allowing the brain to see things differently. And that, of course, is the skill of a great comic, where they'll take a situation and turn it on its head and then use that as a way of making you laugh. And then you're transported into a new way of looking at that situation, and can be very helpful in developing your understanding of something.
Okay. So I guess we should get right into it then, with aliens and ET and all that. Are we alone?
I would say that my categorical answer to that is no, we are not alone, and we never have been alone.
And how can you be so sure of that? I mean, is there any real-time evidence of extraterrestrial life?
Yes, there is. And I think the best evidence that I've seen of what you would really, in all essence, must be an extraterrestrial being is the Starchild skull, which was discovered in a cave in 1930 in Chihuahua, Mexico. Now, I got to know about this in 2003. And why I particularly mention this skull is we know its provenance, we know where it came from, we have a fairly good idea of who owned it. It has been tested in different ways. It's been tested, the bone chemistry has been tested, the DNA has been tested, a visual inspection of it. It's been tested by, for example, filling it with bird seed and comparing that with a human skull. It's been tested by cutting a piece out of it and looking at the bone thickness. And you can find out about the skull at a website called starchildproject.com. And I have 2 chapters on the Starchild skull in my Acknowledge book that you mentioned earlier on from checktheevidence.com, which I will add is a free download. So anyone who wants to read that book and has got a PDF reader on any device can read my book for free, and they can read all my books for free in electronic form. If you read about the Starchild skull, though, if you say it does have a Wikipedia page about it, but it is declared to be the skull of a deformed human skull of a hydrocephalic child, that is untrue, and it's scientifically provably false.
Okay.
All of the evidence points to the fact that this skull is not from a creature that is human. One of the tests that was done, for example, was some of the DNA was recovered in 2012 by a geneticist who was formerly of the Soviet Union but works in the US. He didn't reveal his identity. There's a whole story behind that. But he found what is called, in sampling the DNA that was recoverable, because this skull is 900 years old, so it's not that you have to use special DNA recovery techniques that, for example, are not used in police forensics, because they're not dealing with material that's 900 years old. They may only be dealing with material that's, say, up to 50 years old, and different DNA recovery techniques are required for such things. So this chap, he recovered a particular set of base pairs, and that is known as the FOXP2 gene. It's a special gene, and it was identified as such because of this particular sequence of base pairs. I think he recovered, I think it was about 200 base pairs. I can't remember the exact figure, but it's in the documentation on the Starchild Project website. And so it was identified as a particular gene, which is has an analog in human DNA, and in the whole of the human species, within the FOXP2 gene, you can only have 2 genetic variations in the whole of the human species. And one of them, if you did have one particular variation, you probably wouldn't live. And the other one, if you have the other variation in the FOXP2 gene, you wouldn't be able to speak. So anyone that can speak and anyone that's sort of fine has an identical FOXP2 gene in every human on the planet.
Okay.
However, this FOXP2 gene, which was recovered from the Starchild skull DNA, had 56 differences to the human sequence. So the DNA, when it came out, and you can read the information that's on the website, the DNA recovered from the Starchild skull was even less similar to humans than dogs.
Oh, okay.
And I think the DNA was about coming out. Statistically, they didn't recover all of the DNA. They didn't do a full genome recovery because the funds weren't made available to do that. And there's a whole story behind that. It came out at roughly 50% the same as humans, when, of course, as you may have heard, chimpanzees that are we're supposed to evolve from. We didn't evolve from chimpanzees, by the way. That's another, it's basically another story. That's false. Chimpanzees have 98% the same DNA as humans, and that's in all the textbooks. So if you have this human-looking skull, which has approximately 1/3 the bone thickness of human skull, even though that bone is, I think, 2 or 3 times stronger than human bone, and it's 50% the same as DNA. Can you count that as a human skull when it's got 25 physical deformities? And I was involved in some of the sort of not exactly the research, but I got to know Lloyd Pye, who was looking after this skull. He was kind of a curator for the skull between 1999 and his death in 2013. And everything that I learned from him checked out. That there was, as far as I could tell, all the scientific information that he gave was accurate based on what you'd read, for example. And for example, you can go and look up what the FOXP2 gene is, and you will find that what I've said is true. The FOXP2 gene has got nothing to do with aliens, but it's everything to do with human genetics, and you can find that in any textbook. I looked that up on the NIH database, NIH website, National Institutes of Health, which is an American website. It all checks out. So the Starchild, I think, is skull, as it's called, is probably the best piece of physical evidence available which shows you that an alien being, at least one alien being, has visited this planet over 900 years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting. I never heard of that story.
Right, and again, if you put it onto a search engine, you'll almost certainly come up with the Wikipedia page declaring it to be a human skull, and they'll debunk most of the facts that I've given you, and there are many more.
Does it have an elongated skull, or?
No, it does have an unusual shape. If you look at it from the top, if you get a plan view, it actually looks like an apple. It does, as I say, have 25 physical deformities.
So that was found in a cave. So
yeah. It was found by a teenage girl. She was about 15, and then they were on vacation in from El Paso. They were in the Chihuahua area of Mexico.
Okay.
She sort of was told not to explore this cave system, and then she found these two skulls actually in the same place, and then she took them back to El Paso, Texas, and that's where it was later passed on to somebody else. I mean, there's a whole story that I do. It's like a 2-hour presentation on this, just this skull. So. And all the backstory to it, 'cause it's turned into quite a sort of messy story, basically, recently. So that's in my book as well.
So, would you have any other evidence then of alien?
Well, I think you then have to go to other things, such as the Travis Walton case. That's, to me, a good example of a case which was witnessed by 5 people. Are you familiar with Travis Walton's case at all? Before I give you
is this in England, or?
No, this was in the US in 1975. He was basically a lumberjack or a logging contractor.
Yeah.
And if I tell you the story,
vaguely,
Right. So it's a very important story because his experience was witnessed, and they made a film about it. They made a film in 1993 called it was released in 1993 called Fire in the Sky, and it had Robert Patrick in, who was in the Terminator film.
He went missing for a few weeks, didn't he?
But it was 5 days actually. Yes.
5 days, yeah.
Yeah. The basic gist was there was him and I think there were 5 of his buddies. They were finishing a day of logging in Snowflake, Arizona, at the Turkey Springs, I think was the name of the forestry area. And get to the end of the day. It's a November day, November the 5th actually, 75. And they're packing up, and they've packed up and got in the truck, and they're driving down the forest track down to go back onto the road to go home. And it's getting dark, and they see a light coming across the forest. They think the trees are on fire, but then Travis jumps out. They all see a flying saucer. Travis jumps out and runs towards the craft. A beam comes out of some kind. He flies about 10 feet in the air. His body falls to the ground. And they just drive off. His buddies drive off in a mad panic, absolutely terrified. And they drive, panic-stricken down the mountain a bit. And then his best friend, who's driving the truck, Mike Rogers, he says, "We can't do this. We can't just leave him." And he goes back. But when they go back, he's not there. And then they eventually they get out and they get torches and they look for him. He's not there. They can't find him. It's dark. They get back in the truck, go to the town. They report it to the police. 6 guys go up, 5 guys come down, and the police come and question them. They take polygraph tests over the next couple of days. The community thinks they've killed him for the money, for the contract and taking his money or whatever, or going to keep the money. And then 5 days later, a phone call is made from a phone box to Travis's home, and they think it's somebody messing around because the story has got out that Travis has been a flying saucer has come, and there's no Travis, and so his wife thinks it's a joke that Travis is calling, but it wasn't. It was really him, and he was back, and he was gone for 5 days. And all of the evidence points that really is what happened. Travis recounts being taken up in a flying saucer, essentially, or waking up in a flying saucer rather than being taken up. And he sees these aliens coming towards him, and then he's eventually escorted to another room, sees these human-looking aliens with helmets on, They eventually pacify him, but he by that time he's got out of the craft into a larger craft, and he sees all these other craft within the larger one, and then they put a mask on him, and then he wakes up on the road 5 days later, looks up, sees a little light going off into the sky, and away it goes. And all of that story checks out. I've met Travis Walton. I met him in 2016, and he took a lie detector test. He had urine test. His clothing was tested. There was a test done at the site, anomalous tree ring growth at the site, other anomalies in the vegetation at the site. All of the story tracks out just as he said it. He's been telling the same story for, let's see, 44 years now. So as far as I'm concerned, what Travis Walton reported, he reported accurately. He was taken up into a craft. The aliens, we think, probably helped him to recover, and he was delivered back to Earth 5 days later.
Did he have any after effects?
Only positive after effects. His health actually was improved, and for a man of his age, he had somewhat better health than he might have done in certain areas.
Okay.
And anyone can read his book, which is called A Fire in the Sky, I think. The original book was called Travis Walton Experience, or the Walton Experience, and they can get it from his website. Just put Travis Walton website or book, and I've got a signed copy that he sent me in 2010. And there are many other reasons to believe that story is 100% true.
So, taking the two examples, there's hundreds of abductions and testimony stories from all over the world. I mean, when you collect them all, can you give us a picture of like what exactly an extraterrestrial would look like, or from all the general testimonies?
Right. Well, there are several different types. This is something I do go into in the book a little bit. And the most common type is what's called the grey alien, the little sort of 4 foot tall being with the almond-shaped eyes. But again, if you read all the literature, there is some variation in the description of those. Travis Walton, for example, he described 2 types of aliens that he saw, and neither of those were exactly the same as the greys. There were some aliens that he described which looked a bit like the greys. They had bulbous heads, but the eyes were round rather than almond-shaped, and they were wearing red suits. And the greys are meant to be, just basically naked, according to most witnesses, or they might have some simple clothing on, and they have dark eyes. So that's one type of alien. There are others that claim that the aliens look exactly like us, and again, Travis Walton described some human-looking aliens. They seem to be very beautiful, and perfect skin and stuff like that. So people have described those sorts. Then, of course, we have the accounts of the reptilian beings that you've probably heard about. I wouldn't say skeptical is the wrong word, but the stories of the reptilians seem to have got kind of mixed up with other things a lot. There are, of course, these stories in mythology, and that's where some people think the stories of goblins and and dragons and things come from. That there are aliens, an alien race that's come here. I'm not sure what to make of that. There are also stories of giants. Of course, in the Bible, the giants of the earth, and then you get onto the Anunnaki. But from my understanding, the detailed descriptions of those are not very, they're not very clear. They don't describe how tall they were exactly, just that they were giants. Were they 7 feet tall? Were they 8 feet tall? Were they 9 feet tall? Were they 10 feet tall? That doesn't, from the literature that I've read, there doesn't seem to be a very clear pattern. Certainly not as clear as it is with the grey aliens, which are almost always about 4 feet tall, but then there are supposed to be taller races as well. And the reptilians, there's quite a mix of descriptions about those. There doesn't seem to be anything that I can think of that jumps out. So primarily, to answer the question, the 2 main types that I've heard reported are the grey alien types up to about 4 feet, they can have green skin, they may have grey skin, black eyes, and the other type are often very much more humanoid looking. Going back to I think you mentioned the skulls, The other thing which Lloyd Pye talked about when he was talking about the Starchild skull a little bit was the Paracas skulls. And again, you can look at the Paracas skulls online. Paracas, I think, is how you spell it. They have an elongated skull. They have a cranial capacity of about 3,000 cc's. Now, again, they're in Peru. They're in a museum. Some DNA tests have been done on those, but the results that I've seen don't seem very clear. It's a chap called Brian Forster who's done that. But again, ask a biologist. There is absolutely no way with head binding, because they say, oh yeah, it's just a child that's had its head bound when at birth and they've forced the skull into a certain shape. Yes, you can do that. Yes, you can deform the skull. Yes, some cultures do that. But doing that does not increase the volume of the cranium to 3,000 cc's. It will only keep it roughly the same as, which I think is 1,200 round about for an adult human. You can't increase the volume of the skull up to 3,000 cc's. It's not possible without, death, basically. So the Paracas skulls, again, to me, are good evidence of some type of non-human being, living in Peru at some time.
Okay. So the reptilian thing, I guess that's like, well, David Icke kind of territory. With the well, I think it's like shape-shifting, isn't it?
It is, and I think there's a bit of confusion about that, because some people think that the shape-shifting is like a physical transformation, like you see in some of the science fiction films, where a human will suddenly transmogrify into a reptilian. But again, if you read into that, and I've actually spoken, I think, to 3 people who say they've seen these reptilian beings, and some of them say it's not. It's like an overlay. It's like they're not physically, fleshy reptilians, but it's almost like if you can imagine a ghost overlaying itself on a human being. Again, some people have reported seeing that in various accounts. So it's more like that. It's almost like only a partly physical being, and I think that's an issue which comes into this whole alien question, which shouldn't be overlooked. The tales of fairies and leprechauns and things like that. I think when you study the literature and when you learn about, for example, how reality can be bent, and there seems to be many examples of that happening, I think what you're looking at is different levels of physicality. You and I are physical flesh beings, and then we could probably have whole conversations about angelic beings, which are light beings or whatever, and don't really seem to have a solid physical form. And I think I do think there are such entities, and I think people have encountered them, interacted with them. But then I think there's a scale, so you can actually be only a partly physical being or more physical than non-physical. I think there's something of a sliding scale, and I think if the reptilian race is a real race, the way I look at it is, and the way I think of the David Icke stories and accounts, is that they're somewhere in between being physical and spirit, if you will, non-physical. And that I think even David Icke may even say that in some of his books. So I think that if people are thinking they'll see, the Queen physically transform into, a lizard
on TV,
on TV, you ain't never going to see that.
Just tune your TV to a certain angle, maybe.
Exactly. But is the Queen controlled by a reptilian race or whatever? Well, I don't know. I find it difficult to accept, but reading what I've read and speaking to people that I've spoken to, I probably find it less difficult to accept than some other people.
Well, I'm sorry to cut you off there, but then you can take it to the next question. Then is it demonic? Then some people think that it's the devil incarnate, that demons. They're not anything that we should be seeking.
I again, that's a question that comes in. I talked about leprechauns and fairies, and I think you could, that they're more benign beings. And yes, you could equally go to the demonic side of things, and maybe that's part of it too. I think if you were to take the Starchild skull, for example, that does appear to fit with the physiology of what a grey alien is supposed to look like. So that appears to be the skull of a physical being. Right, but some of the other grey entities, maybe they are again less physical. Maybe they are sort of, you might call them demons, but that's just coming more from another paradigm, a religious paradigm. Whereas I'm approaching it a bit more from a normal sort of biological or scientific paradigm, I suppose. And I think there is some validity to it. But I think for religious people to just say, oh, it's all demons, it's all the devil trying to deceive us and turn us away from God, which of course is how some people react to the whole alien question. I think that's from my study and research, that's just too simplistic. You can look at the Muslim faith, for example, and that has the concept of the jinn, the jinn in there. And I haven't studied that in depth, but yes, that seems to be in their vocabulary, and I think we should pay attention to that, as in looking at the whole picture and not just writing that off as religious nonsense, but equally not saying it's has no scientific validity.
Yeah. Well, sorry.
So I was just going to say that. So you should pay attention to those things and try and see where they fit in. And the other thing which I can mention here, that which other people don't often mention, I mention it a little bit in the book, is the Gnostic teachings. Because if you look at the Gnostic teachings and you read, for example, some of the translations of the Nag Hammadi texts, and there's a very interesting book by John Lamb Lash, called Not in His Image. There are analogues there too with what he calls the archons, and these are meant to be these kind of parasitic or demonic's not quite the right word, entities which come into our reality to prey on us. So there are analogues with the sort of more Christian demonic descriptions, and I urge anyone to sort of consider those angles too.
Well, and that kind of leads on to my next question then, because I kind of agree with what you're saying, that nothing can be ruled out, and you can all the angles have, you could say, equal validity, really, from my perspective, because that leads on to the next question, and where did it come from? And could it be actually both, that they're from also a faraway galaxy and also an interdimensional? I mean, or
yes,
is it one or the two, or could it be two together? Or?
I think again we're looking at a whole range of phenomena, and I think I accepted long ago that we have a non-physical aspect to our being. We do have a soul. That soul can apparently leave the body and gain information and return to the body and stuff. And so I think there must be beings which have a as I say, a non-physical aspect to them. So, but equally, I think there are physical beings like us who are capable of physical space travel. And I think some of the craft that have landed here, and I'm convinced they've landed here, they've left various types of evidence. Perhaps the most famous, of course, is the Roswell crash. Again, if people have only got a couple of hours, the thing that I mentioned in the book is the 1994 Roswell TV movie by Paul David, which is an excellent kind of packaging of the Roswell incident into a 2-hour kind of film. Some of it is dramatized, of course, as you can easily tell from watching the film. But that is a case where a physical metallic craft crashed in Corona, which is about 70 miles from Roswell, in June or July 1947. And I think all the evidence tells us that that is what happened. And it wasn't one of ours. It wasn't a Japanese project or a Nazi project. It wasn't. It was a craft from not round here. Same can be said of a less well-known case, which they covered up a bit better than they covered up Roswell, which was the Aztec case from 1948, which happened in April 1948. And I mentioned that in the book as well. I've done a chapter, I think, on that, or one of the chapters, and that's covered in a book by Scott Ramsey, He's written 2 books actually, and a lot of evidence that was a 100-foot craft. It crashed in Aztec, New Mexico in 1948, and beings were inside, and people went inside of it. And I think all the evidence I've read about that from the book, that really did happen, just as reported by several witnesses.
Okay, so then it's a bit of both, really. Then.
Yeah.
So with the dimensional thing, then, like some people like there's 4, 5, 6 dimensions, it even goes up to 10, and we're currently in the 3rd or 4th or 3rd, I think. That's what people say.
We've all been trained in Euclidean geometry, 3-dimensional worlds. Einstein made scientific history by recognizing that we really live in 4 dimensions by adding time to the mix. Time is a physical property. We know that we live in at least 10. That's the current dimensions. 4 of them are directly, we can experience them. But we know there's 6 others that we can't get at directly, but we know we can infer their existence mathematically. What makes that provocative to people who've discovered that is that a Hebrew sage by the name of Nachmanides, back in the 13th century, predicted that from studying the text of Genesis. He concluded that our universe has 10 dimensions, only 4 are knowable, to use his term, and 6 are not knowable to us. And I find that fascinating because we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on atomic accelerators to discover what Nachmanides did by studying the text. So the 10, some say 11, there's some debates among mathematicians about details, but there's awareness within the advanced scientific community that we live in more than just the 4 dimensions that we directly experience. So that some of us tend to regard those 6 inaccessible dimensions as the domain of things like angels, the domain of paranormal behavior. And it's our suspicion that the UFOs somehow are trafficking from those dimensions into ours. And that it turns out that if you try to speak about dimensions more than 3 or 4, the average person can't relate to it without special training. There are only 2 people that really relate to that. That's mathematicians with special training or small children. If I have 2 beings there in that 2-dimensional world, I could put my finger a millionth of an inch away from each of them, no matter where they are. I can enjoy greater intimacy with each of them than they can with each other. So we certainly read the whole concept of an additional dimension starts to, we get a feeling for what that might mean. See, we're going into what would be called technically a hyperspace, more than 3 dimensions, and that's not easy to do with.
So how does that work? How do they go from dimension to dimension, and why can't we, or can we?
Well, I think we can travel to other dimensions, and I think the way that this happens, or at least in some sense, it's through transcendental experiences. That's how I think we can do it while we're still, in our bodies. For example, I mentioned briefly in the book the research of Rick Strassman, who in the early 90s, he did a study with I think 40. A clinical study this is in a hospital, I forget which state it was in the USA, and he had I think 40 patients, and he administered to them dimethyltryptamine, DMT, and they recounted their experiences, and some of them were very close to the abduction experience. We didn't get into that earlier on, but some of them, what he described, he found indistinguishable from an alien abduction experience. These people recounted meeting non-human intelligence, interacting with the intelligence. They asked him questions, or they would give information and this sort of thing. But they did this while they were lying in a hospital bed. So I think that when you have a transcendental experience or a psychedelic experience, you are actually beginning to transfer some of your conscious into these different dimensions. And of course, you must have heard this idea of losing the sensation of time. I think that's one of the things that people who have near-death experiences report, that you have a total loss of the sensation of time. And this appears to be what happens when you start to experience other dimensions. At the time thing that we experience is very, very different. It can run very slowly or very quickly, or just appear not even to be there. So I think there are different ways of doing this, and I think there is even technology which can actually allow you to access these other dimensions. And for example, there's a very interesting account. I don't think I managed to fit it in the book, but there is a chap called Mike Oram who's written a book a few years ago, not that long ago, about 6-7 years ago probably, called "Does It Rain in Other Dimensions?" And he has had sort of UFO flying saucer experiences for most of his life. I think he's probably in his late 60s or early 70s now. And he described this. Why I'm bringing this particular account up is I remember going to see a talk by him. I think it was in 2010, and he actually went to Area 51 just to drive along the extraterrestrial highway, or went near there. And then I think they pulled over somewhere, and then he had some type of memory loss. And then later on, he remembered that what happened was some truck approached, and they were taken out of their car. And on the back of this truck, they had this device of some kind, some kind of unit. And he said that they switched this thing on, and it was essentially like a doorway or a portal. And he walked through it, and the next thing was he was in what he thought was Area 51. He was in like a laboratory somewhere, And there are a number of accounts of this sort of technology. I mean, I'm not saying that that's exactly what happened, but something very odd happened to Mike Oram, and I've heard a number of accounts like this. So if you have this technology, this portal technology, then is that accessing other dimensions to enable, in other words, you travel from a physical dimension to a less physical or non-physical dimension, hyperspace, if you will, and then you come back. I think that, and again, I could get into whole other areas actually here, but I think, my simple answer, if I was pushed into that, I'd say yes, I think that sort of technology does exist. And I think certain extraterrestrials can use that technology, like we use, switching a kettle on sort of thing,
Do you think that's what they're doing in Geneva and the CERN thing?
Well, again, people have said that, and they're trying to create a black hole. I'm not aware of any particular evidence for that exactly, but I think what is relevant to this is some of the occult practices. And I think, again, I think near that site in Geneva, near CERN, on one of the CERN sites, they do have, for example, that statue of Shiva, the Hindu god or goddess. I can't remember which gender it's meant to be. And that, again, you look at some of the Vedic scripts and these so-called wars with exotic weapons and nuclear weapons and this sort of thing. I do think there is something like that which probably did happen if you go back far enough. And I do think that's an example of this extra-dimensional technology being in use, at least in some instances.
Well, you did mention time, and my understanding with the time and speed, it's one way of getting into dimensions or opening up dimensions. That video that came out with CERN was a bit strange. I don't know, that could have been, probably was a hoax, but sometimes they do these on purpose, to throw people off the scent.
What the fuck? Fuck! Shit! Fuck! Shit!
I agree, and I think I've by what you said there, I think I felt the same way. It looked pretty weird, and even if it was a hoax, it was a weird kind of hoax to put out, wasn't it? You know, I suppose that's perhaps what I might say. So I wasn't sure what to make of it. But again, you know, if you start to look into the stories of people like Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons and some of the occult links to organisations like Disney, and my friend Carl James has done quite a bit of research into that area. I think this all factors into this larger picture of reality, as I would call it, and it does take you into these realms of other dimensions, basically.
Let's just probably change a little, crop circles, because you wrote about it in your book. I know that the BBC came out, I think it was the other day, and had an article, I haven't heard, like, my dad invented crop circles, you know what I mean? Even though they're all over the world, his dad invented them. I think it was Dave Charlie and his friend Doug Bauer. So, I mean, yeah, probably most of them are done by a man in the field, but the one that stands out for me is the one in Crabwood, with the binary code.
Oh yeah.
Not just because the way that the straw would have been flattened. I don't think it was flattened. I don't know the correct story, but it was flattened at an angle, or it would have been pretty hard to do.
But I think again, people can read the book, which is the last part of the acknowledged book. Yes, and I think you pick a good example there, and I focus on that. I think I've got a whole chapter, or much of a chapter, on the so-called alien head crop circle. So to tell the story of that, and there's actually a bit of a new story that came out, and it's interesting that the BBC. Do you know that article you just mentioned? Was it fairly recently dated? Was it this summer, or was it earlier in the summer?
It was just 2 days ago.
2 days ago, okay. That's quite interesting that they posted that.
Sorry, they had a video as well. I mean, his son was
okay.
playing a guitar and
yeah. I mean, what we're really talking about, to try and simplify it, is if you take the whole crop circle phenomenon, we have what I call, and other people have called, mechanically created crop circles or crop formations. In other words, you know, as you were saying, you get a plank and you get some string, and you trample on the plank, or and then you follow lines of string or markers that you've laid out in the field, you know, with whatever method. And but the thing is that you can detect in most cases when a formation has been planked if you're careful enough. And researchers such as David Caton and Robert Hulse did this in many circles, I think between sort of the late 90s and the mid 2000s. They visited many circles, and people can watch Richard V. Hall's film, which is called Crop Circles Hidden Truth. I think it's about 90 minutes, and that's on YouTube and stuff. And that goes through, you know, the background to some of this.
When you actually got down and started examining these things in detail, tell me what you started to find.
Well, first of all, as you go into the formation, you can immediately get an overall impression by the general lay. Yeah. You know, either it's very, very flat or it looks a mess.
Yes, I mean, the genuine crop circle is almost perfect. Yeah. The lay flows like water flowing down a stream bed, you know. Okay. The man-made ones, because they are mechanically stomped for the most part.
In a half sort of pace, you get sort of bunching or layering of the crop, the seed heads.
Yeah, but the genuine ones are so fluid. There are no mistakes. There are no acute changes of direction.
And what about any other clues within the crop itself of boring?
Yes, well, the board impacts the stems and damages the stems, so that's something you have to really get down hands and knees job to look closely, and they're not easy to see. You can miss them, as we have done in the past, I guess.
Yes.
So the leading edge of the board as it strikes the stem, it's causing an injury to the stems and causes lines of creases. So if it's like a 3-foot board, you'll find rows of stems more or less lined up.
And so the real question is, are there any crop formations that have been created that have not been created by mechanical means? And there, to me, there are two. Then you divide that into at least two portions itself. Are there crop circles which are created by extraterrestrials or off-world entities? And are there crop circles which are created by some type of human agency but using a non-mechanical method? And I think the answer to both those questions is probably yes. So I do think there is some type of extraterrestrial intelligence involved in creating some of the formations. And Richard D. Hall, he gives a good example of that in one of the films where, and I can't remember the name of it, but basically with that particular formation, I think you almost started to describe it there, but it's not the crabwood head one. It's where the crop is laid only halfway down. So the bends in the crop are like 12 inches off the ground or 8 inches off the ground to make the formation. So the pattern is made out of folds that are only 8 inches above the ground or something like that, and it hasn't been completely trampled down. And there's no way that you can you can half trample a stem. It's either trampled or not trampled. You can't just bend it at 90 degrees 8 inches off the ground. And so that's a good example of there's no way that formation can have been mechanically produced. It must have used some other technique.
Was this the crabwood one? Or
no, this was another one, and I can't remember the name of it. It's in Richard Hall's film. It's sort of like some circles in a pattern, and it's a fairly intricate pattern. It's not just a simple formation.
But your premise is right that it's like they know the method that to do it with the plank of wood. I mean, we've seen it to go around with this plank of wood,
right?
Stamping it down, So
and we do know that there's a group called Circle Makers. Their other name is Team Satan. But as Richard uncovered in his film, if you actually poke around in their website and look at some of the HTML source code, it says MI5 intelligence or something, and secret agent hidden in the code. And what's that got to do with anything? And you'd think, well, nothing, until you find that one of the creators, John Lundberg, has apparent links to MI5. So what are the intelligence services doing? Messing around with crops. What relevance of crop formations? They're just these silly patterns in the field, surely made by Doug and Dave, And so there is something going on.
I'd like to see the funding for that when they go to Parliament.
Yeah.
What are some money for crop circles?
Again, if people want to read the sort of last whatever it is, the 90 pages of my book, I lay everything out in the way that we're describing. But going back to the alien head, yes, the one with the binary code, that is a real message. And it is unusual, not only in the way that the formation is conceived, because it's fairly intricate, but also because it's written in English. It's an English message. When you decode it, it's written in the American Standards Code for Information Interchange, which is ASCII. So why would an alien do that? Why would they choose to say, beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises, much pain but still time, conduit closing? That was the message. And they also varied the upper and lower case within the words for some odd reason. I really struggle to think that somebody like Doug and Dave could conceive of a message like that, which has a sort of philosophical and spiritual kind of, angle to it. It's quite a subtle, interesting message. It's not just, watch out for the 11th of September next year when you'll be struck by a disaster of some kind or something, or a planetary alignment or something. It's totally different to that. And it is a binary code. There are 1,374 bits, I think, or thereabouts within that message. I think it might be a few less than that, but it's over 1,000 bits that have got to be correctly laid in the crop to be decoded accurately. And then you've got the alien head itself and the three little, what apparently might be flying saucers, and then a square behind it and stuff. Very, very intricate formation. And another group was said to have been involved in creating this circle, this formation, the alien head, and it was called B1 AC Projects. according to the information that was posted on the blog, which I reference in a posting on my website. B1 ACT projects, in other words, black projects with the 1 replaced with an L. So being created, have been created using advanced directed energy technology, and it involves the use of microwaves, and it uses some type of field effect. And I don't mean cornfield effect. I mean, magnetic fields and electrical fields. And I actually highlight in the book how certain effects that have been seen within crop circle evidence were also seen at the World Trade Center on 9/11. And in particular, I can mention one which is less well known in relation to crop circles, which is levitation. Freddie Silver is a well-known crop circle researcher. He reports that he was levitated in a crop circle. Pat Delgado was levitated in a crop circle in 1989. And we have the same sorts of effects, for example, with the crop having apparently been heated because of the way it's been damaged. But then the heat has been so high that it should have actually incinerated the crop, and it hasn't. Because the soil has changed in certainly one crop circle, which indicates temperatures of 600 degrees centigrade, which would have incinerated the crop. That's what the soil effects show, but the crop on top of it was, just flattened. It wasn't burned.
Okay.
And this was exactly what was seen at the World Trade Center. We had effects like apparently melted steel. We had these weird fires. But yet we could see that there was little to no heat. People weren't burned. They came out covered in dust. People near the World Trade Center were levitated during the destruction of the towers. That happened to David Hansher. It happened to another chap. So all that's in the book.
Okay. And that's interesting with the microwave theory then. I wonder, would that work instantly, or it wouldn't take long then to make the crop circles, perhaps?
No,
if they use that microwave technique.
No, witnesses that have seen them form, and there's one video of a crop circle forming, which is of dubious origin. I think it's probably a hoax. But the witnesses that have apparently been walking their dog or whatever and seen these things form, they said they're done in sort of 10, 15, 20 seconds. And they often report seeing light orbs and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's not going to take long. The other formation one, we've got onto that topic a little bit, which I mentioned in the book, is the so-called Pusey Nautilus, which year was that? I can't remember which year it was. And that crop formation was investigated by David Caton, and it's actually like a nautilus shell. These little sort of shellfish that have a spiral shell, and they swim around, and they look like the actual creature looks like a little squid sticking out of a spiral shell as it's swimming along, and this Pusey Nautilus, which was made, and I didn't notice this at first, it was Richard D. Hall that pointed this out to me fairly recently, that adjoining the main formation, there was actually a smaller version of the same formation, like, 1/6 or 1/10 the scale. And it was exactly the same as the main formation, just off to the side, adjoining it, right on the end of it. And it's almost like it was some type of calibration, and that they create this tiny little version of the Nautilus, only about 2 feet across, with the same formation. It's like they'd got a pantograph or a zoom facility, and they'd done the little formation first, and then created the big one straight after. The curious thing was that by the time David Caton got there, the small formation had been trampled down, whereas the main one was still there. Almost as if somebody was trying to say, "Oh, we don't want to see that because that'll make it clear that this is basically some technology. We've got it. Oh, we'll set it. We'll spin it up. Get the beam going. That's that size. Now we'll just change the zoom factor, change the magnification factor, and do the main one." Again, it could be wrong.
Did someone take a picture of that little small one? Or?
Yes. In fact, when I spoke to Richard, he wasn't aware. He just thought there was the one of the main one with the little one trampled down. But I found both that, and I found an earlier picture where they've got the main one and the little one still intact. So you can see that this is what happened. So again, and the readings that David Caton got in that formation suggested that there was residual energy still in the ground. And this is the other thing that happened with 9/11. The residual energy which stayed in the ground after the destruction of the World Trade Center is what Dr. Judy Wood has written about quite a bit, and we've talked about it separately in relation to 9/11. So that's another, to me, another indicator that what we're looking at is a technology that somebody, you know, an Earth-based agency or somebody connected to an Earth-based agency knows about and knows how to use.
Okay, very good. If they that technology, then I mean that leads us on then to Area 51, Roswell, Rendlesham Forest. Is it
Rendlesham? Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, is that a place where the alien UFOs have crashed and they're testing out these technologies?
Well, I mean, the whole Area 51 thing. I mean, again, my simple question is, what is in there now? I mean, you know, do they need an area the size of Switzerland to fight terrorism? You know, because there's no Soviet Union communist enemy now, really. You know, to develop all these advanced nuclear or Star Wars SDI weapons. So what is there? Why is the secrecy still so massive there? What have they got there? You know, and again, you look at the Bob Lazar story, for example, and the simple fact that Bob Lazar said he went in there, he saw that they were testing craft. By the way, I don't believe the whole Bob Lazar story. I've put some of that in my other book, Finding the Secret Space Program. But just quickly, he said he saw stuff in there, and he came out and he said to John Lear, look, if we go up to this mountaintop at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night, that's when they test fly the craft. So they drove up there at 10 o'clock on the Wednesday night with a video camera. They filmed it. That video is on YouTube, and it was a weird thing over Area 51.
This story is extraordinary, especially if it's true. And it all started in the desert, just north of Las Vegas.
A local scientist who's worked at Groom Lake
said to be where top-secret weapons systems have been tested over the years.
He has asked that his identity be shielded.
Exactly what's going on up there? What's going on up there could be the most important event in history. Physical contact and proof from another system, another planet, another intelligence.
What would happen to you if the government learned that you were giving us this information?
He just wanted to stay alive.
Maybe this has been kept from us for a good reason.
Sir, how do we know you are who you say you are?
My name's Bob Lazar. I'm known for working at a classified base and reverse engineered alien spacecraft.
It went all over the world. He put Area 51 on the map.
Can we ever be made whole if we're not believed?
We can't verify what was going on in his background.
I have no motivation to lie.
The science and the technology can change us.
We've always looked to the skies for answers, instead of looking into ourselves.
You know, so that to me proves that there's secret, exotic stuff going on there. You know, whether they've got aliens there, I don't know. But they have got technology there. I spoke to somebody who worked there in 1979. That's also in my Secret Space Program book. I have no doubt that they have advanced technology there, which probably not only is, you know, propulsion technology, but it's probably energy technology and weapons technology as well. And that's one thing that people overlook, weapons technology, which doesn't get talked about by any of the UFO researchers, really. So, and switching to Rendlesham, that my best guess at what that was, and Richard D. Hall and I have talked about this quite a bit, is that it was probably not an alien craft that landed there. I think it was some type of advanced drone technology, which again maybe came out of Area 51, or you know, there's also Pine Gap in Australia, which is another large secret base area. So I suspect that what happened at Rendlesham in Suffolk in 1980 was that they were testing the security of the nuclear armed base using some type of advanced drone technology to see, and this was a suggestion that Jacques Vallée made in one of his books, in the mid-80s, I think they were seeing what would happen if there was some kind of weird thing happening at a nuclear-armed base, how the personnel would react, how the security systems would they be effective, and so forth. And I don't think an alien craft was involved in there, but I can't prove that for sure.
I mean, how if it is a cover-up, or how did they keep it so secret for so long? Or I know there's some people come out with stories on what they've seen, but how are they able to keep a lid on it?
Well, I think essentially my answer to that is the cover-up is as good as it needs to be. But if you read the acknowledged book in its entirety, I try and unpick how the cover-up works, or parts of the cover-up work. And in essence, I've already mentioned part of that. And Richard Hoagland, he had this good phrase. He said that the lie is different at every level. And all you need to do is create a consensus that things are a certain way or not a certain way. The consensus is, in the mainstream, crop formations are made by men with planks. That's the consensus. And it has been the consensus for almost 30 years. And the consensus, for example, about 9/11 is that Muslim hijackers hijacked planes and crashed them into the World Trade Center. That's the consensus. And it's the consensus that matters. So cover-ups, whether it's about aliens, whether it's about glyphosate in the food, whether it's about the damage caused by vaccinations, cover-ups are created by establishing a consensus. And once you go beyond the critical mass, and you can control the press, and you can control academia with giving funding or restricting funding, for example, you briefly mentioned the climate change. How do you keep that covered up? Well, you fund the studies that talk about the effects of CO2, and you don't fund the studies that talk about, for example, the effects of the solar wind on the climate. That's a way of keeping a cover-up going, for example.
But I think the media have a big part to play. I mean, they always go with the official story. There's never anybody has veers off from the official story, they're pounced on. But in one way, that's a weakness, because I think a lot of people don't trust their media anymore, and that kind of opens, once you know that the media are lying. We've seen Russiagate and all these stories. I mean, they lie so obviously these days. They're really sloppy these days, I think. So once you see the official networks, BBC, CNN, all these lying all the time, it opens up everything, so then people...
I think that's true, and I think my response to that, so yeah, I agree with you totally, and I've observed the same thing. So I think what's happened is, and is also happening, is that, yes, you can see on the BBC website, trust the BBC, we don't, I think it says, you can trust BBC News. It says that somewhere on the website. So clearly, as you say, they know that people are no longer paying the same level of attention to their, bogus stories and useless reporting, that they just repeat what they've been told to repeat, rather than actually investigating it with their own brain, using their own brain and looking at the evidence. They don't do that. They're not allowed to do that. So you're right, there is this shift now to alternative media, but the fix is in. The fix is in alternative media. For example, Alex Jones is a very popular figure in the alternative media, but he's a liar. He lies about 9/11. He just tells a different lie to the mainstream. So all the people that go to listen to him are going to get a different story about whatever issue it is. But I know, and I can prove, that he's not telling the truth about 9/11. Why he's not telling the truth, that's a different issue, but I know he's not. And I think now what's happening is, you get lots of YouTube channels, some of them have been censored, but when you get onto the web, you're in a different world, because there is so much noise being generated. For every good YouTube video that's properly researched, for example, Richard D. Hall's videos, Michael probably name a few others, there are probably 50, 60, 100, it's just some guy talking about a flat earth, into a microphone, flashing up a few images. It's an opinion and an internet connection is all he's got, and so for anybody that's broken free of the mainstream, they have to wade through the molasses of 100 bogus YouTube videos before they find one, you know, that's actually well researched, presented in such a way that doesn't make you fall asleep.
But I still think that's good, because that's an education. It's a personal education for the person that's going through that journey. I mean,
I hope so.
Yeah, you would hope so. You would hope so.
but see, the thing is that, you know, Dr. Judy Wood and I, but she's spoken about this a bit, and she and I had quite long conversations about this, is that people aren't taught problem-solving skills. They're only taught how to repeat things or given a basic understanding. So if the problem is that you don't know about something, it's difficult for people to know how they can know, you know, where to turn and how to solve the problem of the problems that I've described. You know, and the people that, like myself, you know, and I don't mean, I'm not trying to be arrogant or blow my own trumpet. There are very few people, you know, I still work in an academic capacity, but the way that I work for the Open University, that's how I earn my living, but yet I'm separated from all my other Open University colleagues because I work at home. You know, I don't interact with them face to face, not like in a staff room at a university or anything like that. So I have been able to use my my development of my knowledge from doing software engineering work and apply that to this study. So I've had to develop those skills, and I'm just transferring them to another domain, if you will. And we talked about that a bit earlier. But other people don't have that experience, and so I've encountered this with people. You know, they're easily led, and I've had to. I know people who personally know me. I've explained things to them. Then they've gone and looked at a YouTube video and said, "Oh, Andrew, have you looked at this? Have you looked at this? Oh, it means that you're wrong." Or, you know, and I'll say, "No, look at it. Look. And they'll go through it, and then they realise they've been deceived by this other video or whatever it is. And that's happened several times. So it's much harder work. In other words, when you're doing your own thinking, you can still be misled. You know, and I was misled. That's what my first book is about. I was misled, and I was taken down a dead end for nearly 2 years with 9/11 stuff, and I think this is happening to people all the time, and it's really tough. And I think it's happening in all the fields. You know, both with the alternative health, with the alien stuff, the UFO stuff, 9/11, JFK research, you know, the Pizzagate stuff, and all of that. They've all got their fair share of infiltrators who are either putting out outright disinformation or trying to just lead people into an area which is going to lead them nowhere.
Yeah, true. So I'll just finish off with you're just talking a bit about yourself, Andrew, if that's okay. Have you ever seen a UFO yourself or encountered?
Yes, I have. I've seen 4 UFOs in my life.
Okay.
I mentioned that actually in the first chapter of the book, if anybody wants to read the details. They weren't close-up sightings. They were basically lights in the sky. In 1974 or 75, I saw like what I call an acrobatic star. I know it wasn't a comet or a meteorite. There were 2 of them manoeuvring together, and I was with a school friend, and we both saw that because she acknowledged that she could see it too. But it was way off in the distance, right up, it looked like a star. I saw another one which I thought was a luminous insect, but it wasn't a luminous insect. It was some weird thing. I can barely describe it. I tried to describe it in the book. That was in 1990 in Rugby, UK. I then saw had a daylight sighting of what I thought was a Charles balloon, but it couldn't have been a Charles balloon, the way it behaved. That was in July 2005. And then I had a sighting of an orange and a white orb at about 10 o'clock at night, travelling silently in parallel, and that was in Pembrokeshire would have been July 15th, I think it was, 2010.
Did you get your camera out?
No, I didn't have time. It was a very quick apparition, and it went behind some trees.
Okay.
We were sort of down we went sort of over the hill, and we were right down. We couldn't have got up in time to see it.
Yeah. Okay. And what about interdimensional stuff? Any outer body?
Not really. No. I mean, no more than anybody else in terms of I had some weird experiences which have led me to conclude that yes, you know, there is other stuff going on in a. For example, I had a healing experience with my son when he was in hospital, and I'm convinced that was, you know, unusual. It wasn't the way it happened. It was something which, you know, I seem to partake in. You know, somehow it's a bit difficult to describe. But I've had bits and pieces like that, and but nothing that's where I've gone and met other beings and spoken to them or anything like that.
Okay.
Nothing like that.
I think a parental bond is quite strong. It works on a psychic level sometimes, doesn't it?
That's basically what I think it was. Yeah, that's the kind of thing I was trying to say, really. Yeah.
Is it hard for you to get information for your research and books? I mean, how do you collect the information? Is it?
It can be quite laborious. I think what I think is one of the main steps I try and do is go back to the original source as far back as I can. So if it's in a book from the 1980s and it's quoting a book from the 1950s, go back to that 1950s book rather than trying to quote from the 1980s one if you can find a copy. So things like that. Go back to the original news story if it's requoted in another story. Try and find, if you find the name of a witness, try and find if that witness exists. See if they've reported anything else. That type of thing is what I do. So it can be laborious sometimes, but I think there is, again, the Acknowledged book and all my books, I've tried to debunk some stuff which has been written about before, and where I found that it's been misconceived, then I've tried to sort of highlight that. If I found that it's actually correct, I've said, yeah, this appears to be correct based on what I found.
And you said you're in Open University. How do your colleagues react?
Well, I don't talk to them. I don't even bring this up.
Okay. What about your friends then, or your acquaintances?
Well, I'm fairly reclusive now because I've been a home worker for over 20 years. So I don't have a wide social circle of friends that I see regularly like perhaps some other people do. So I actually have quite a few friendships which have been forged through doing this research and getting to know people. People have asked me to give talks and things like that. So some of the friendships, like I got to know Richard Hall. We're friends. We've been friends for about 10 years now, and he's a very good friend of mine now. But I wouldn't have got in touch with Richard had it not been for doing this sort of research. But going back to the OU, because we all work at home, as I say, we don't really interact. And so the only way they would find out what I do is if they happen to stumble on it for some reason, and they probably wouldn't, because most of the information that I talk about is filtered out of search engines by and large.
They might learn something as well.
They might. And I mean, just to give you another example on that, because as you asked, a couple of years ago, in fact it was about 3 years ago, there was another chap, another person I got to know, and they actually, she actually advised me. I was getting mixed up between two people. She actually advised me that one of the OU modules was talking about the phenomenon known as cold fusion, and they were saying it was a hoax, and it was bad science, and it was poorly researched and stuff. And that's actually used as an example in the module materials. So I found out who wrote the module materials, and I wrote to them saying, look, you really need to take that out because it's not true, And I sent them a reference. I said, look, you read Eugene Mallove's book, he's written about all of this. What you've got there is not true, and it needs to be corrected. Because it was denigrating the reputation of two scientists who were basically destroyed by a person that I know, Stephen E. Jones, actually, in essence. And I got no response. They didn't even acknowledge my message. And then there was another time where I wrote to a guy, I think he's in the civil engineering department, and I can't remember how I found his name. I think it might have been through the same person that wrote to me. And they were talking about structural engineering of making some comments about the buildings on 9/11. So I sent them a copy of the Where the Towers Go book, the Dr. Judy Wood book about the destruction of the World Trade Center, and said, as I said, would you like to read this book, because it's highly comprehensive and it's written by qualified scientists, etc. And they said, "Oh yes, please, yes." So I sent it to them, and I nothing back. And I think I wrote to them about 6 months later. Did you get the book? What did you think of it? Nothing. You know?
Yeah.
So this is what you're faced with. You know, it really is, because when you get into this stuff and you realize how much deception there is, it forces you. You know, there's that old saying that when an honest but ignorant person is faced with an uncomfortable truth, they either cease. Sorry, but honest but ignorant. Yeah, they either cease to become honest or they cease to become ignorant. And that's the choice.
Yeah. Well, that leads perfectly to my last question. I mean, are we ready for the truth, the great unveiling? I mean, are we? You know, I mean, there's this idea that if everybody knew what was happening, they'd probably go a bit crazy, they'd go bananas, because their mind wouldn't be able to cope with it.
I think that people, the way I look at that now, and I probably give a slightly different answer now to what I would have done a few years ago, is that because the deception is so widespread, most people don't know the truth when they see it. That if they're presented with an issue, they don't really want to think deeply enough as to A, whether it really is true, and B, what the significance is. And there is, you know, there's a whole range of factors which I think factor into your question there. And I think the simple answer is no, people are not ready. But the other answer to that is it's not their fault, because there is another group of beings or entities, or it could be humans, they could be aliens, I really don't know. It could be some agreement between the two groups that is keeping the rest of the human race deliberately in ignorance. And they are using powerful psychological weapons 24/7. And it's not just TV, there are other things which I think are going on, which are helping to keep people in a state of ignorance. And I think they've even got technology, these beings or whoever they are, to measure the general level of how awake the population is. And if it's going up to a certain level, they will then start new psychological operations to try and push it back down again. Like they'll have another shooting incident, or they'll have another sort of mini 9/11 event, or something like that. And I think that is going on 24/7. And if people need to wake up to one thing, it's that they are being deceived by a superior intelligence which knows them inside out. And then if they start off with that as a prime assumption that is probably correct, and work from that basis, then they may get further than if they assume that what I've just said is not true and couldn't be true. I think that would be the way I would say that. So,
what does Richard E. Hall say when he's finishing off? Doesn't he say, what's he say?
Believe none of what you see and only none of what you hear and only half of what you see. But I think that there's the question though, belief and knowledge. I've said to people more recently that I think the biggest problem in the world right now, it really is nothing to do with aliens or whatever. It's the fact that the majority of the human population values belief more than they value knowledge. It's as simple as that, you know, and because they're encouraged to believe things rather than know things, you know, and unfortunately that applies to all religions and much of science too. You know, they're encouraged to believe things and go by assumptions, and you know, the idea of having knowledge is often discouraged, you know, particularly in favor of you know, material possessions or distractions, or whether you look nice, or you know, all these sorts of things that I think often discourage people from acquiring knowledge and trying to verify that knowledge and test it.
Okay, I just to say, like, I thought the poem on your website was very, very good, very thought provoking. You know. It's what was it, an Indian
yes
person. I mean, it has, like, you speak your truth, create your own community. I mean, it's kind of like be the change you want to be.
Almost.
And I think it's a good positive message, like, because, you know, Project Fear can take over, and you see it all the time with Brexit, and politics, it's dividing people, you know, and it's I think the feed off fair really, and if you're positive, it's, you know, you can be anything you want to be, really, at least in your mind, in your own mind. So that was great, Andrew. That's really good. Thanks very much. So apart from your website, are there any other ways people can follow you online, on social media, or how do they go about it?
Yes, I mean, just as a sort of final word, I suppose, I am on Facebook. I don't use Twitter, but people can find me on Facebook if they wish, and they can contact me through the website. I've got a contact form. You can use the email address that's on there if you don't want to use the contact form. So if anybody's got any questions, comments, corrections, augmentations, I'm always happy to hear from people. If they want to take the time to write, and I do try and respond to all of the sort of messages that are sincere.
And have you any projects in the pipeline? What are you up to at the moment?
Well, what I'm trying to just put together now is another book based on one of the presentations that I'd done, and articles, and it's about the nature of our planet, the Earth, and starts off by looking at some of the hollow earth ideas that people might have read about, and then this is based on a presentation I did a few years ago, and then I look at some of the evidence that the Earth is actually expanding, has been expanding since about 300 million years ago, and this is an area which I found most intriguing when I came across it about 13 years ago, and there's some articles about that on the website, and I'm now putting that into book form and updating it and things, and I find that quite interesting.
Andrew, I just want to say I appreciate you giving me your time today and giving my viewers the lowdown and expert insight into all things ET and UFO related. It was truly enlightening.
My pleasure, thank you.
So thanks, Andrew, and keep up the great work.
Thank you.